Welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling something pretty cool today, advanced English grammar.
Yeah.
It's about taking your English to the next level, going beyond just getting by, to express those really complex thoughts with total clarity. And I think it helps you master the language, honestly.
Absolutely. And for this, our trusty guide is Grammars for Advanced English, a comprehensive guide for fluent and confident English learners.
Quite a title.
It is. But don't worry. What we're doing today is pulling out the most useful stuff from this huge book.
The best bits.
Exactly. And by the end, you'll have a solid grasp of these advanced concepts. You'll know why they work and how to actually use them, to really take your communication up a notch. I'm hoping for some aha moments for our listener.
Me too. So let's jump right in. Let's start with sentence structure.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting ways to make your sentences pack a punch. And first up, inversion.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit technical, but it's really just about playing with word order, flipping things around a bit. Why would you do that?
It's all about emphasis, and it can create some really interesting effects. Like, the book gives this example. Not only did he complete the project, but he also exceeded expectations.
Right.
We'd usually say he not only completed the project, the usual way, but by starting with not only and then switch the subject and verb, you really highlight that second part. The fact that he exceeded expectations.
And you put it right in the spotlight.
Exactly. And starting a sentence with a negative adverb, like, never have I seen such a breathtaking view. It immediately makes it so much more dramatic than just saying, I have never seen.
It's like hitting the pause button and then boom.
Yeah, exactly.
So when would our listener actually use inversion in their own writing or speaking?
It's great when you want to create a specific style. Add a touch of formality or drama, or even surprise. If you want to really emphasize an idea, make it stick in people's minds. It's great for formal writing, or when you're trying to be persuasive.
To convince someone of something.
Yes. It can even subtly shift, who's responsible for something in a sentence. But that's getting into the really fine details.
Very sneaky. Okay, next up, mixed conditionals. It sounds like we're messing with time travel or something.
It kind of is. With regular conditionals, you're usually talking about hypothetical stuff within the same time frame. But mixed conditionals let us connect hypothetical past events to what's happening now, or current situations to past results.
So you're jumping back and forth?
Exactly, just like in real life. Things we did or didn't do in the past can have consequences now.
Yeah, our past choices.
Right.
Give us an example. Help us visualize these time-bending sentences.
Okay, here's one. If she had studied harder, she would be at a better university now.
Right.
See how if she had studied harder is something that didn't actually happen, it's in the past, but the result, she would be at a better university, is about the present. It links a past choice to her current situation.
You're connecting the dots across time.
Yeah, and you can build arguments with this. Like, if past policies hadn't been so short-sighted, we wouldn't be facing this current crisis.
It's like saying, look, this is where those past decisions led us.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about the other example?
Right, that one is, if he were more patient, he would have succeeded. Now, if he were more patient is hypothetical. We're saying he isn't actually patient right now, but the result, he would have succeeded, is in the past. So a present characteristic affected a past outcome.
It's a subtle way of saying this personality trait has consequences.
Exactly.
So mixed conditionals let you talk about these what-if scenarios in a really nuanced way, connecting the past and present.
They do. They reflect how time and consequences are intertwined in our lives.
Deep stuff. Okay, last one in this section. Cleft sentences. What's the secret behind these?
They're another way to emphasize something, but instead of just rearranging words, we split a single clause into two, often using it is was or a would word, and this lets you really highlight a specific part of the sentence.
Okay, let's hear them in action.
All right. It was John who solved the problem. A simpler way to say it would be John solved the problem. But the Cleft sentence puts the focus squarely on John. Maybe there were other people who could have done it, or maybe John isn't who you'd expect. The structure itself makes him stand out.
It's like you're shining a spotlight on him.
Yeah, perfect analogy. And another example, what I need is more time to prepare. It takes the important part, more time to prepare, and puts it at the end, making it the main point. Normally you'd say, I need more time to prepare, but the Cleft sentence makes it much stronger.
It emphasizes the need.
Exactly.
So you're basically guiding the listener's attention.
You are.
Making sure they get the key message.
Yes, it's very useful for making your point clear and persuasive.
Clever. Okay, we've covered some really cool ways to structure sentences. Now let's move on to how advanced grammar deals with time itself, tenses and aspects.
Absolutely. The guide dives into the future perfect and future perfect continuous. These are the tools we use to talk about actions that will be finished or ongoing at a specific point in the future.
Like looking into a crystal ball.
Kind of.
All right, future perfect first. By next year, I will have completed my degree. What's the main idea here?
It's like setting a reminder on your phone, but instead of an alarm, it's a notification saying that something will be done by then.
The action will be finished.
Yeah, by next year is like that future deadline.
Right.
And will have completed means the action will be done by that point. It's all from the perspective of that future time.
So you're looking ahead and saying something will be in the past by a certain future date.
Exactly.
Okay, then we have the future perfect continuous. By the time you arrive, we will have been waiting for 2 hours. This one feels like it's all about the duration, how long something will have been happening.
Precisely. It's emphasizing an action that's in progress for a while, up until that future point. It's not just that the waiting will be over when you arrive, it's that it will have been happening continuously for that specific amount of time.
Okay, so future perfect is about completion in the future. And future perfect continuous is about how long something will have been going on in the future.
Right.
When would our listeners actually use these tenses?
Oh, they're super useful for planning, forecasting, describing situations that will be ongoing in the future, especially in things like project management, making predictions, coordinating events, anything with a timeline.
Makes sense. Okay, now let's rewind and look at how advanced grammar helps us talk about the past, with the past perfect and past perfect continuous. These help us create a timeline of past events.
Exactly. The past perfect, like in she had finished dinner before the guests arrived, tells us that one action had finished, was completed before another past action arrived. It's a clear sequence. We know what happened first.
It's like saying this happened and then that happened.
Exactly. And the past perfect continuous, as in he had been running for an hour before he felt exhausted, puts emphasis on how long an action was going on before another point in the past. It's not just that he ran, it's that he was running for a while before he got tired.
So past perfect tells us the order, and past perfect continuous gives us a sense of duration.
Yes.
It helps us tell more detailed, more vivid stories about the past.
Definitely. It adds depth and clarity when you're talking about past experiences or explaining historical events.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to those little words that pack a punch. Modal and semi-modal verbs. When you use these in a more advanced way, you can express so much more than just facts.
Right. We can talk about possibilities, necessity,
Obligation.
shades of meaning. Exactly. The guide highlights how we can use modal verbs to speculate about the past, like must have shows strong belief about a past event. He must have forgotten about the meeting.
You're making a deduction based on the evidence.
Yeah. It's like saying, given what we know, this is the most likely explanation.
Right.
Then we have might have and could have. These express possibility, but there's a slight difference.
Okay.
She might have left early, suggests it's plausible, maybe based on a hunch or something. She could have left early, implies she had the option to.
So must have is like near certainty about the past, and might have and could have show different degrees of possibility.
That's a good summary.
These are so useful for expressing opinions, making educated guesses about past situations.
Absolutely. They let you show how certain you are, or aren't.
Now let's explore would. This one little word can do so much.
It can. The guide focuses on how we use it to describe past habits and create hypothetical scenarios.
Okay.
When we talk about past habits, would describes things you did regularly in the past, but not anymore. Like when I was a child, I would spend hours reading books. It paints a picture of a recurring activity. It has a slightly more, literary feel than used to, which also talks about past habits that have stopped.
A little bit more nostalgic.
Yeah, exactly. And would is crucial for hypothetical situations, especially in conditional sentences. If I were you, I would take the opportunity. You're imagining a different situation and saying what you would do.
Giving advice, exploring possibilities. So would helps us create these what-if scenarios. And remember past routines.
It adds a whole other layer to how we talk about possibilities in the past.
And now let's look at how we can build more complex thoughts. Using complex clauses and constructions.
Sounds good.
First up, relative clauses. Those little additions that give us extra info about nouns.
Right. And the key difference here is between defining and non-defining relative clauses. Defining ones are essential. They tell us which specific noun we're talking about. The book that I borrowed was fascinating. That clause that I borrowed is vital. It tells you which book we're talking about. And notice, no commas around the clause.
It's like it's built right into the sentence, essential information.
Exactly. Now, non-defining clauses, these add extra information, but it's not essential for understanding the sentence. My brother, who lives in Canada, is visiting us next week. Him living in Canada is just extra info. The main point is that he's visiting. And these clauses have commas around them.
The commas act like parentheses, setting off the extra information.
Exactly. Knowing when to use those commas is so important. It really changes the meaning and the flow of your writing.
Now let's talk about making our writing more concise. With reduced relative clauses,
Okay.
how do we make those clauses shorter and smoother?
Well, reduced relative clauses let you say the same thing more efficiently. Like instead of the man who is standing by the door is my uncle, you can say the man standing by the door is my uncle. We just removed whose.
Cutting out the extra words?
Yeah. Another example, the documents that are needed for the application must be submitted by Friday. We can reduce that to the documents needed for the application must be submitted by Friday by taking out that R.
So it's about being more direct,
It is. It's more advanced, more efficient.
especially in formal writing. All right, let's move into the world of nominalization and advanced vocabulary. This is where our language can sound more academic, more precise.
Definitely.
First, what exactly is nominalization?
It's turning verbs and adjectives into nouns, and it often makes your writing more formal, abstract. Like instead of we decided to expand the business, you can say the decision to expand the business was made. The verb decided becomes the noun decision.
You're shifting the focus to the concept itself.
Yeah. Another example, she was honest in her statement, becomes her honesty was appreciated. The adjective honest becomes the noun honesty. This is really useful for formal reports, academic papers.
Well, you want to sound more objective.
Exactly. It's a stylistic choice. You use it when you want to emphasize the idea itself, rather than who's doing the action.
Now let's talk about making our English sound less like a textbook and more natural. Collocations and idiomatic expressions.
These are crucial for sounding fluent.
Definitely.
Collocations are words that just naturally go together, like you make a decision, not do a decision.
Even though make and do both talk about actions.
Right. It's about learning these pairings that native speakers use without even thinking.
Okay. And what about idioms?
Idioms are phrases where the meaning isn't literal, like break the news. You're not actually breaking anything. It means to tell someone important news, often bad news.
It adds color to your language.
Yeah, it makes it more interesting.
Paying attention to these natural pairings and idioms is what makes you sound like a fluent speaker.
It's about understanding how words are actually used in real life.
Okay, last but not least, punctuation and style. Those small but important details that can really make a difference.
Absolutely. We're talking about using things like colons and semicolons correctly.
Right.
These can make your writing so much more sophisticated and clear. A colon introduces an explanation, an example, or a list. He had one goal to win the championship. What comes after the colon explains the goal.
It's like a drum roll, announcing what's coming next.
Yeah, good way to think about it. Now, semicolons connect two closely related sentences. She was tired, however, she continued working. The semicolon shows a strong connection, more than a comma would, but not as much separation as a period.
It's like a bridge between two ideas.
It is, and it makes your writing more mature, more nuanced.
Okay, and lastly, the principle of parallel structure. This is about being consistent in your grammar, right?
Absolutely. It means making sure that parts of a sentence with similar meanings have the same grammatical structure. The guide has this example. She enjoys reading, to paint, and playing the piano. See how reading and playing are gerunds, but to paint is an infinitive.
It sounds a bit off.
It does. The correct way is she enjoys reading, painting, and playing the piano. Now all three are gerunds. It's balanced, it flows better, it's clearer.
It just sounds right.
Exactly. Parallel structure makes your writing more elegant and easier to understand.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. Advanced sentence structures like inversion, mixed conditionals, and cleft sentences. The differences between future and past perfect tenses. The nuances of modal verbs. The importance of relative clauses and how to make them shorter. Nominalization, collocations, idioms, and even punctuation and style. Phew.
We have. And the takeaway is that by mastering these concepts, you can express your ideas in a much more precise, clear, and powerful way. It's not just about rules. It's about giving you the tools to communicate more effectively.
Exactly. This deep dive into grammars for advanced English was about giving you a solid understanding of the most important elements of advanced grammar, helping you communicate in a more sophisticated way.
So here's a final thought. Think about the next time you write an email or have an important conversation. How could you use one or two of these techniques to make your message clearer and more sophisticated? And what aspect of advanced grammar are you most interested in exploring further?
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
All right, so you want to sound more, well, impressive when you speak English, right?
That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Today, we're going to tackle advanced sentence structures.
Yeah. Those are like the secret sauce for fluent English.
But it's not about memorizing a bunch of dry grammar rules. It's about finding the right tools to really express yourself with more, clarity and impact.
Definitely. We dug into some really cool resources that break down these techniques. You'll be surprised how easy they are to use once you get the hang of it.
It's kind of like the difference between using just a basic hammer for every single job versus having a full toolkit with all those specialized tools.
Exactly. And the best part is, a lot of these techniques, you might already be using them without even realizing it. It's just about becoming more aware of how they work and how you can use them deliberately to create specific effects.
And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through the 4 main types of advanced sentences. Then we're going to look at how to connect your ideas smoothly using these things called subordination and coordination.
Oh, and we can't forget about parallel structure. It's like the secret to making your sentences sound super balanced and elegant. Plus, we'll cover some cool tricks like inversion for emphasis and advanced conditionals for those tricky what-if situations.
Oh, and don't forget relative clauses, ellipsis, nominalization, all these fancy terms that actually make a huge difference in how clearly and persuasively you communicate.
Our goal is to basically demystify these things and show you how they're not just abstract grammar concepts, but practical tools you can use to immediately improve your English. And we're going to start by laying the groundwork, going back to the basics, the 4 main types of English sentences.
Okay, so the first one's easy, simple sentences. It's something you learn pretty early on. Just one complete thought, one independent clause.
Exactly. It's like she writes novel. That's your basic building block, your foundation.
But then we start building, adding more layers. Next up, we have compound sentences. Think of these as 2 or more of those simple sentences, those independent clauses joined together.
Right. And there's this handy little acronym to remember the main words that connect these clauses. Fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. They're like the glue that holds the 2 independent parts together.
So a compound sentence could be something like, she writes novels and he edits them. Each part could stand alone as a simple sentence, but together they create a more complex meaning.
Right. And then we level up again with complex sentences. They have one independent clause, that complete thought, and at least one dependent clause.
Now, what's a dependent clause?
Well, it can't stand alone as a sentence. It needs the independent clause to make sense. And usually it starts with these things called subordinating conjunctions, words like because, although, while, since, until.
Oh, I see. So an example would be like, although she writes novels, she prefers poetry.
Exactly. She prefers poetry is the main idea, the independent clause, and although she writes novels is the dependent clause, providing extra information and context.
And lastly, we have the big kahuna, the compound complex sentence.
Now, this one's a mouthful. It combines elements of both compound and complex sentences. So you have at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause.
Like a super sentence, basically.
Yeah, you could say that. For instance, she writes novels, but she prefers poetry because it allows more creativity. 2 independent clauses linked by but, and then that dependent clause because it allows more creativity, explaining why she prefers poetry.
That's pretty complex, all right.
It is, but by understanding these 4 types, you get a better grasp of how sentences are structured in English, and it gives you a framework for building your own more sophisticated sentences.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the types of sentences. Now, how about those connecting words you mentioned, subordination and coordination?
Well, think of them as the tools you use to show the relationships between ideas in your sentences.
Okay, so subordination first. What's that about?
Subordination's all about creating a hierarchy of ideas. One idea is the main event, the independent clause, and the other is kind of like the supporting actor, the dependent clause.
And you use subordinating conjunctions to make that connection.
Right. Those are words like because, although, while, since, until.
Yeah.
They show the relationship between the two clauses.
So, like, if you just said, she became famous, that's a simple sentence. But you could add more context with subordination. For example, before she became famous, she struggled as a writer.
Exactly. The main idea is that she struggled, and the subordinate clause, before she became famous, adds that extra layer of information, telling us when she struggled. Or you could do it with cause and effect. Instead of just saying he failed the exam, you could use a subordinating conjunction to explain why. Like, although he studied hard, he failed the exam. It highlights the contrast, making the fact that he failed even more unexpected.
So subordination is basically like adding those little details that give your sentences more depth and meaning.
Exactly. It's like painting a richer picture for the listener or the reader.
Yeah.
Then there's coordination, which is about linking two ideas that are equally important.
Okay, so no hierarchy here, just two ideas side by side.
Right. That's where our good old fanboys come in for and, nor but, or yet so. They're like bridges connecting two equally important islands of thought.
So you could say, she enjoys writing, but she dislikes editing. Both ideas are important, they're just connected by that contrasting but. Or you could have something like, he can study now, or he can fail later. It's presenting two options, two equally possible outcomes.
Exactly. Coordination helps you connect those related thoughts in a way that feels balanced and natural.
All right, so we've covered the 4 types of sentences, subordination and coordination. What's next on our list of advanced sentence tools?
Well, let's talk about parallel structure. This is one of those things that just makes your English sound super smooth and polished. It's all about expressing similar ideas in the same grammatical form.
Oh, I know what you mean. It's like when you hear a sentence that just doesn't sound quite right, even if you can't explain why.
Exactly. Our source has a great example of what not to do. She likes reading, to write, and editing. See how that feels a bit clunky? It's because the grammatical forms aren't consistent.
Yeah, I hear it.
Reading and editing are gerunds. It's when you use the ing form of a verb like it's a noun, but to write is an infinitive, a different grammatical form. So to make it parallel, you'd say she likes reading, writing, and editing. Now, all 3 elements are in the same gerund form, and it just flows better.
Much better, yeah. And this parallel structure thing, it's not just for lists, right? You can use it with other types of sentences too.
Absolutely. Take the not only, but also structure, for example. Not only did she finish the project, but she also submitted it early. See how the structure after not only mirrors the structure after, but also it creates this really nice sense of balance and emphasizes both actions equally.
That's a really good example, yeah. And I guess when you use parallel structure like that, it also makes your sentences more persuasive, like you're really driving home the point.
Precisely. Parallelism adds clarity, readability, emphasis, and even a bit of persuasive power. It's a powerful tool for making your communication more effective.
Okay, so we've talked about building complex sentences and making them balanced. Now, what about playing around with word order? That's something I always found a bit tricky.
You mean inversion?
Yeah, that's the one.
Inversion is basically when you reverse the usual subject-verb order in a sentence. It's not something you do all the time, but it can create a more emphatic or formal tone.
So in what kind of situations would you use inversion?
Well, one common use is with negative adverbs like never, seldom, and rarely. So instead of saying she rarely makes mistakes, you could say rarely does she make mistakes.
Yeah.
It puts that rarely right up front, emphasizing how infrequently it happens.
I get it. It kind of sounds more dramatic that way, more like something you'd read in a novel or a poem.
Exactly. It adds a bit of literary flair. You also often see inversion in conditional sentences, especially in formal contexts. So the typical structure would be, if I had known, I would have helped. But with inversion, you drop the if and switch the subject and verb. Had I known, I would have helped. It's more concise and has a slightly more formal feel.
Interesting. So it's not just about changing the word order, it's about creating a specific effect.
Precisely. It's about using the structure of your sentences to add nuance and emphasis to your message.
Okay, and speaking of those if sentences, conditionals, our source mentions something called advanced conditional sentences. What are those all about?
Well, they go beyond the basic if-then structure that we learn in beginner English.
I remember those. They're pretty straightforward, like if it rains, I'll stay inside.
Exactly. But with advanced conditionals, you can get more sophisticated, more nuanced with your hypothetical situations.
So what are some examples of those?
One type is mixed conditionals. They let you play with different time frames within the sentence.
So past, present, future, all mixed together.
Exactly. You could have a condition in the past that leads to a consequence in the present. Like, if she had studied harder, she would be more successful now.
Interesting. So it's like saying that a past action could have a different result in the present.
Right, and it's a way of expressing regret or reflecting on how things could have been different. Then there are implied conditionals. These are interesting because they don't even explicitly use the word if.
How does that work?
Well, the structure of the sentence implies the conditional. Take this example. Were I you, I would apologize. That were I, instead of the usual if I were, signals a conditional relationship. It's a more formal, indirect way of expressing a hypothetical situation.
Yeah, it does sound pretty formal, like something you'd hear in a speech or maybe read in a very old book.
Exactly. It's a more elegant, old-fashioned way of expressing a conditional. It adds a touch of sophistication.
Right. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from simple sentences to these fancy conditional structures. What's next on our advanced sentence adventure?
Well, how about we talk about relative clauses? These are those clauses that provide extra information about a noun in a sentence.
Right. Like, the man who lives next door is a musician. That who lives next door part tells us more about the man.
Exactly. And our source makes an important distinction between restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. This is one of those little details that can really make a difference in how clearly you write.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Restrictive relative clauses are essential. They provide information that defines or identifies the specific noun we're talking about. They're so important that they're not set off by commas. For example, the book that you lent me was fascinating.
Yeah.
That clause that you lent me is crucial because it tells us which specific book we're talking about.
Oh, right. Without that clause, it would be any book. So restrictive clauses are like giving the essential details to pinpoint exactly what we're talking about.
Precisely. Then there are non-restrictive relative clauses. They provide extra information that's not essential for understanding the sentence. They're set off by commas because they're like a little side note, a bit of bonus information. The example given is, the Odyssey, which is an ancient epic, remains influential. The fact that it's an ancient epic is interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that we're talking about the Odyssey. It's just additional information.
So the commas with non-restrictive clauses are like a signal that this is extra information, not essential to the main point.
Exactly. Mastering this distinction can make your writing much clearer and more precise.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving on, our source also talks about ellipsis and reduction. Are those like another set of tools for making sentences more concise?
Exactly. They're all about omitting unnecessary words without sacrificing clarity.
So being economical with your words, cutting out the fluff.
Precisely. The guide gives this example. She can go to the party if she wants to go. The reduced version is she can go to the party if she wants to. That second "to go" is implied, so you don't really need it. It just makes the sentence cleaner.
Oh yeah, that sounds much better. It's like streamlining your language, getting rid of those unnecessary repetitions.
Exactly. As long as the meaning is clear from the context, you can often omit those repeated elements. It makes your English sound more natural and less clunky.
Okay, that's a really useful tip. Now let's move on to a concept that sounds pretty intimidating. Nominalization. I've seen that term before, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Nominalization is basically the process of turning verbs or adjectives into nouns.
Okay. So like how?
Well, take the verb analyze, for example. You can nominalize that into the noun analysis. So instead of saying they analyzed the data, you could say the analysis of the data was conducted.
So you're turning the action into a thing, an abstract concept.
Precisely. It creates a more formal, objective tone. You often see this in academic writing or in reports where the focus is on the concepts and processes rather than the people involved.
Right, it makes sense. So it's a stylistic choice that can make your writing sound more formal and sophisticated. But I guess you wouldn't want to overuse it, right? It could sound a bit too impersonal or jargony if you're not careful.
Absolutely. It's a tool to be used strategically, not just thrown around randomly.
Okay, good to know. So what's the last stop on our advanced sentence structure tour?
Let's finish with cleft sentences. These are sentences that are structured in a special way to emphasize a specific part of the information.
So it's like shining a spotlight on a particular word or phrase.
Exactly. Our guide has this example. She needs a new laptop. That's a perfectly normal sentence. But if you want to really emphasize what she needs, you can use a cleft sentence. What she needs is a new laptop.
Ah, I see. By starting the sentence with what she needs, you immediately draw attention to that part.
Precisely. Cleft sentences are a really effective way to control the flow of information and make sure your key message lands with the listener or reader.
Like you're saying, hey, pay attention to this part, it's important.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool for adding emphasis and clarity to your communication.
Wow, we've covered so much today. It's like we've unlocked a whole new level of English expression.
We have. And the key takeaway is this. Mastering these advanced sentence structures isn't about sounding overly academic or complicated. It's about having more tools in your toolkit to express yourself more effectively and creatively.
Right, it's about being able to convey your ideas with precision and nuance and even a bit of elegance.
Exactly. Think about all the techniques we've discussed using subordination to show the relationships between ideas. Parallel structure for balance and impact, inversion for emphasis, advanced conditionals for those complex hypothetical situations, the different types of relative clauses, being concise with ellipsis and reduction, using nominalization in formal contexts, and cleft sentences for highlighting key information. It's quite a lot to take in.
It is, but the good news is you don't have to master everything all at once.
Exactly. Start small. Pick one or two techniques that resonate with you and practice incorporating them into your speaking and writing.
Right, like maybe try using more subordination to connect your ideas more clearly, or experiment with parallel structure to make your sentences sound more polished. And pay attention to how other skilled English speakers and writers use these techniques.
Exactly. The more you observe and practice, the more natural and effortless these advanced structures will become.
So, as a final thought for you to consider, think about which one or two of these advanced sentence structures you could start using today to improve your English communication. Which one do you think would have the biggest impact on your current goals? Give that some thought, and until next time, keep practicing and exploring. Happy learning.
All right, so you're here, you're listening in because you want to level up your communication,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to express yourself
Sure.
with more nuance.
Yeah.
And really kind of master the art of language in a way that just makes you a more effective communicator.
Absolutely.
So consider this deep dive a shortcut to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to be looking at all sorts of advanced vocabulary today and really kind of pulling out the gems, the words that you can actually use in your everyday life, in your professional life,
Right.
to really enhance how you express yourself.
Exactly. And we're not talking about, just throwing in big words to sound smart. It's really about finding those words that help you get your point across.
Right.
More precisely and more
Impactfully, yeah.
impactfully. Yeah, exactly.
So we've gone through a bunch of different sources, and we kind of curated this selection for you. And covers a whole range of areas.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about how to express your opinions more effectively, how to describe people and their personalities.
Yes.
Some really powerful vocabulary for professional and academic settings. How to articulate your emotions and feelings with greater depth, and some advanced vocabulary for winning those debates and discussions.
Oh, absolutely. Being able to hold your own
Yeah,
in a really engaging and thought-provoking way.
exactly.
So let's dive right in.
All right, let's start with something I think we can all relate to. Expressing our opinions and ideas.
Okay.
We all have thoughts and we want to share them, but sometimes the words we use just
Don't quite cut it.
don't quite cut it. They don't have that oomph, right? So our sources highlighted some really interesting upgrades in this area.
Okay.
So take the word articulate, for instance.
All right.
It's more than just speaking. It's about expressing yourself clearly and fluently. Like someone who can take a complex idea
Right.
and break it down in a way that anyone can understand.
Exactly. It suggests that there's a real thoughtfulness behind their words.
Yeah.
They're not just rambling. They've carefully constructed their message to be easily understood.
And then there's eloquent.
Ah, yes, eloquent.
Now, this is also about fluent expression, but it adds a layer of grace and persuasiveness.
Right. It's like that speaker who not only informs you, but also moves you.
Yes.
Their words have a certain beauty and rhythm to them that just captivates the audience.
So you can almost think of it as articulate gets the message across. Eloquent gets the message across beautifully and convincingly.
Absolutely. A great distinction.
Yeah. And the examples they gave were things like, she is an articulate speaker who can explain complex topics effortlessly.
Right.
And then his eloquent speech moved the entire audience.
You can really feel the difference there.
Yeah, and it makes you think, have you ever been in a situation where you just couldn't quite find the right words?
Oh, all the time.
And you're just like, if only I had that one perfect word to really nail what I'm trying to say.
Exactly, and that's where these nuances come in.
Right, exactly.
They give you that extra level of precision and impact in your communication.
So think about a time when you really wanted to get your point across clearly, or maybe advocate for something you were passionate about. How do you think having those words articulate or eloquent at your fingertips would it change that interaction?
I love that you're prompting the listeners to really connect this to their own experiences.
Yeah, because it's not just about learning new words.
Right.
It's about actually being able to use them.
Exactly, making them a part of your natural vocabulary.
And on that note of being clear and effective, our sources also talked about concise and lucid.
Yes, these are so valuable, especially in today's fast-paced world.
Oh, absolutely. Like being able to get to the point quickly is a huge asset.
It shows respect for people's time,
Yeah, no one wants to listen to someone ramble on and on.
Exactly.
So concise is about conveying a lot of information.
Yes.
Clearly, but in as few words as possible.
It's about being succinct, getting straight to the heart of the matter.
And then there's lucid, which is kind of like concise, but with a focus on being easily understood.
Right. It's like those instructions that are so clear, you don't even have to ask any questions.
Yeah, they just make perfect sense.
Exactly. And that's the power of lucid communication.
Yeah, there's no room for misinterpretation. And then there's this word perspicuous.
Okay.
Which I just love. I don't know why I love that word.
It is a good one.
It is a good word.
It has a certain ring to it.
It does, yeah. And it basically means expressed in a way that leaves no doubt or confusion. It's like the professor whose lecture is so perspicuous that it clarifies every single question you had.
It's like the idea is illuminated.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I feel like perspicuous is almost like proactive clarity.
I see what you mean.
It anticipates potential misunderstandings and addresses them before they even arise.
That's a really insightful point.
So having this whole spectrum of words like concise, lucid,
and perspicuous.
And perspicuous allows you to really tailor your language to the situation and to the person you're talking to.
Absolutely. It gives you the tools to be both efficient and effective in your communication.
Okay, so now let's shift gears a bit.
All right.
And talk about describing people.
Okay.
And their personalities, because let's face it, we meet all sorts of people in our lives.
Oh, yeah.
And having a rich vocabulary to describe them just makes things so much more interesting and insightful.
Absolutely. It allows us to paint more vivid and nuanced portraits of the individuals we encounter.
So one word that came up was gregarious.
Oh, I love that word.
It's such a fun word.
It is, and it describes someone who loves the company of others, who's always up for socializing.
Yeah, like that person who just lights up a room.
Right. They bring energy and enthusiasm to every social gathering.
The example they gave was, he is a gregarious person who loves attending social events.
Perfect example.
Yeah, you could just picture that person, right?
Absolutely.
Now let's contrast that with someone who's meticulous. This describes someone who pays extreme attention to detail.
Right. They're all about precision and accuracy.
Yeah, like a surgeon or an editor. They're the ones who catch the tiniest errors.
Exactly. And the example, her meticulous approach ensures no errors in her work, really highlights how crucial that trait can be in certain professions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's pragmatic.
The pragmatist.
There's someone who's very practical and down to earth.
Right. They're focused on what works rather than getting caught up in abstract ideas.
Yeah, they're all about finding the most efficient and effective solution.
Precisely. And the example they gave was he takes a pragmatic approach to problem solving.
It's about getting things done.
Exactly.
So for you listening, think about the different areas of your life. Where could a more pragmatic perspective help you achieve better results?
I love that you're constantly bringing it back to the listener and their personal growth.
Well, that's the whole point, right? It's not just about learning these words in a vacuum.
Right.
It's about applying them to make positive changes.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to another interesting word. Astute.
Okay.
This describes someone who's sharp, intelligent, and has really good judgment.
They have a knack for understanding situations quickly and making wise decisions.
Yeah, it's like they just have this natural insight.
Right.
The example they gave was, she made an astute investment that paid off well.
It suggests that there was more to it than just luck.
Yeah.
There was a real understanding of the market and the ability to see potential where others might not.
Absolutely. And finally, in this section, we have magnanimous.
Magnanimous, such a powerful word.
It describes someone who's generous and forgiving.
Especially towards someone who's maybe less powerful or who has wronged them in some way.
Yeah, it speaks to a real nobility of character.
Right.
The example they gave was, despite their disagreement, he remained magnanimous and forgiving.
It's about rising above pettiness and showing compassion even in challenging circumstances.
It's a beautiful quality.
It really is.
So as you can see, having these words at your disposal just allows you to describe people in a much more nuanced and interesting way.
It's like having a whole new set of colors to paint with.
Exactly.
Instead of just saying someone is nice or smart, you can use words like gregarious or astute to really capture their essence.
Okay, so now let's dive into the world of professional and academic vocabulary.
Okay.
Because let's face it, these are the words that can really boost your credibility and make you sound like an expert.
Oh, absolutely. They give you that extra edge in more formal settings.
So let's start with the business world.
Okay.
One word that's thrown around a lot is synergy.
Synergy, yeah, it's all about the power of collaboration.
Right. It's that idea that when people or teams work together effectively, the results are greater than the sum of their individual contributions.
Exactly. It's like 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, the example they gave was the synergy between the marketing and sales teams increased revenue significantly.
It highlights how that collaboration can create a real multiplier effect.
And then there's proactive.
Yes, being proactive.
This is so important in the workplace.
It really is. It's about taking initiative, anticipating problems, and taking action before they even arise.
It's about being a step ahead.
Exactly. And in customer service, it's about going above and beyond to ensure a positive experience.
Absolutely. Now, on the flip side, there's ambiguous.
Okay.
This is a word you want to be careful with.
It can lead to a lot of confusion.
It basically means that something can be interpreted in more than one way.
Right. It's unclear and open to multiple meanings.
And the example they gave was the contract's ambiguous wording led to costly legal disputes.
Oh yeah, ambiguity in legal documents is a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. So it's important to be very precise and clear, especially in formal settings.
Absolutely.
Now, shifting gears to something more positive.
Right.
There's entrepreneurial.
The entrepreneurial spirit.
This describes someone who's willing to take risks and start new ventures.
Right. They're driven by innovation and the desire to build something from the ground up.
The example they gave was his entrepreneurial spirit led to the rapid growth of his tech startup.
It captures that combination of vision, passion, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty.
Absolutely. And speaking of success in the business world, there's lucrative.
Yes.
This describes something that produces a significant profit or wealth.
Right. It's all about financial gain.
The example they gave was investing in renewable energy can be a surprisingly lucrative venture in the long term.
It highlights the potential for financial rewards in emerging markets.
All right, so now let's move on to the academic world.
Okay.
Because there are some really interesting words here that can elevate your communication in this sphere.
For sure.
So one word that comes to mind is extrapolate.
Extrapolate.
This is all about taking existing data or trends and using them to make predictions or inferences about the future.
Right. It's a key skill in research and analysis.
Yeah, the example they gave was based on current research, we can extrapolate potential long-term effects.
It highlights how we can use what we know to make educated guesses about what might happen.
Exactly. And then there's paradigm.
Paradigm.
This is a big one. It refers to a dominant theory, framework, or way of thinking within a particular field.
Right. It's the accepted model or set of beliefs that shapes how people approach a subject.
The example they gave was the scientific paradigm shifted dramatically with the theory of relativity.
That's a great example because it shows how a groundbreaking discovery can completely change our understanding of the world.
And then there's cogent.
Cogent.
This describes an argument or reasoning that is clear, logical, and convincing.
Right. It's about presenting your ideas in a way that is both compelling and persuasive.
The example they gave was her cogent analysis of the data persuaded the panel of experts.
It highlights how a well-reasoned argument can really sway people's opinions.
Absolutely. Now, here's a word that comes with a bit of a caution. Esoteric.
Yes, esoteric.
This describes knowledge that is understood by only a small, specialized group of people.
Right. It's specialized knowledge that can be quite difficult for outsiders to grasp.
The example they gave was the nuances of quantum physics can seem quite esoteric to those outside the field.
It's a reminder that while specialized language is essential within certain disciplines, Using it too broadly can alienate your audience.
Exactly. So it's all about knowing your audience and using language that is appropriate for the context.
Absolutely.
And finally, in this section, we have erudite. This
The-
describes someone who possesses or displays great knowledge and learning.
Right. They're well-read, well-informed, and just have a deep understanding of a wide range of subjects.
The example they gave was his erudite presentation covered centuries of philosophical thought.
It suggests a breadth and depth of knowledge that is truly impressive.
So these professional and academic words, they really give you the tools to communicate effectively
Yeah.
in these specific contexts.
Absolutely. They allow you to engage with the material on a deeper level and really show that you know your stuff.
Okay, so now let's move on to the fascinating world of emotions and feelings.
Right.
Because sometimes simple words like happy or sad just don't cut it.
Right. They don't quite capture the complexity of our emotional experiences.
So our sources provided some really great vocabulary to help us articulate those nuances.
Okay.
So one word that stood out to me was exuberant.
Exuberant.
It describes someone who's just full of energy, excitement, and enthusiasm.
Right. They radiate joy and positivity.
Yeah, the example they gave was her exuberant greeting made everyone feel instantly welcome.
It's like their happiness is contagious.
Yeah.
It just spreads to everyone around them.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have despondent.
Despondent.
This describes someone who's lost all hope and is in a state of deep sadness or despair.
Right. It goes beyond just feeling down. It's a profound sense of hopelessness.
Yeah. The example they gave was he felt utterly despondent after receiving the bad news.
It suggests that they're really struggling to cope with a difficult situation.
And then there's nonchalant.
It's nonchalant. Okay.
This is someone who appears calm and unconcerned even in stressful situations.
Right. They have this air of indifference.
The example they gave was she remained nonchalant despite the obvious danger.
It's like they're completely unfazed by what's going on around them.
Which can be both intriguing and a little unsettling.
Yeah, you're left wondering what's really going on beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Are they truly unbothered, or are they just really good at hiding their feelings?
And then we have melancholy.
Melancholy.
This is a beautiful word.
It is.
It describes a pensive sadness, often thoughtful, and maybe a bit wistful.
Right. It's a more gentle, introspective kind of sadness.
The example they gave was the old photograph evoked a feeling of melancholy.
It's like a bittersweet longing for the past.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, for expressing extreme joy, we have ecstatic.
Ecstatic.
This is pure, unadulterated happiness.
Right. It's like being on top of the world.
Yeah, the example they gave was they were ecstatic after their team won the championship.
It's that feeling of overwhelming joy and excitement.
So having all of these words at your disposal just allows you to express your emotions and feelings with much more depth and accuracy.
Absolutely. It's like having a more refined vocabulary for your inner world.
Okay, so let's wrap things up with our final category. Advanced vocabulary for debates and discussions.
All right, let's get argumentative.
Now, these are the words that can help you really hold your own in any debate.
They give you the tools to articulate your points, clearly analyze opposing views, and just navigate those discussions more effectively.
So a key word in any debate is rebuttal.
Rebuttal.
This is a direct counter-argument to a claim or point.
Right. It's about addressing the opposing side's arguments head on.
The example they gave was her well-reasoned rebuttal effectively addressed the criticisms.
It shows that you're not just ignoring the other side's perspective.
Yeah.
You're actively engaging with it and presenting a counter-argument.
And taking it a step further, there's refute.
Refute. Okay.
This means to prove a statement or theory wrong or false.
Right. It's about providing evidence or logic to dismantle the opposing argument.
The example they gave was the new evidence conclusively refuted the long-held belief.
It's a stronger claim than just disagreeing.
Yeah.
You're actually demonstrating that the other side's position is incorrect.
Now, for those really tricky situations, there's conundrums.
Conundrums, yes.
This refers to a difficult problem or dilemma with no easy or obvious solution.
Right. It's those situations where you're just like, how do I even approach this?
The example they gave was the ethical conundrum of artificial intelligence continues to be debated.
It's a great example because AI presents all sorts of complex challenges.
Yeah, with no easy answers.
Exactly.
And then there's fallacy.
Fallacy.
This is a mistaken belief or unsound argument based on flawed logic.
Right. It's about identifying those errors in reasoning that can lead to false conclusions.
The example they gave was his entire argument rested on a well-known logical fallacy.
It highlights the importance of critical thinking in any debate or discussion.
Yeah, being able to spot those fallacies can really help you avoid getting misled.
Absolutely.
And finally, we have juxtapose.
Juxtapose. Okay.
This means to place two or more things side by side for the purpose of comparison or contrast.
Right. It's a great way to highlight similarities or differences.
The example they gave was the author cleverly juxtaposed the characters' contrasting viewpoints.
It shows how this technique can be used to create tension or emphasize key distinctions.
So all of these words, they really equip you to not only participate more effectively in debates, but also to analyze the arguments presented by others with a more critical eye.
Absolutely. They give you the tools to be both a persuasive speaker and a discerning listener.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into advanced vocabulary, it's clear that expanding your linguistic toolkit can really make a difference.
Oh, for sure. It empowers you to communicate with greater sophistication and precision.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, I encourage you to think about which of these words really resonated with you. Which ones do you think you could start using today?
Yeah.
In your everyday conversations, in your writing.
Absolutely.
And it might feel a little awkward at first, but the more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Exactly. And soon they'll be a seamless part of your vocabulary.
And this brings us to a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
How do you think, even just incorporating a few of these more advanced words, could subtly shift the way others perceive you? Your intelligence, your confidence, your command of the English language?
It's a powerful question.
It is. And remember this deep dive. It's just the beginning. The journey of expanding your vocabulary. It's ongoing.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn and explore.
So what new linguistic adventures will you embark on next?
I can't wait to find out.
Me too.
Me too.
All right, so you're here because you want to get to the heart of things, right?
Yeah.
You want knowledge, but you don't want to waste time wading through fluff. And I totally get that. Today, we're going deep on something that's super fundamental to how we communicate effectively, active and passive voice. We use them all the time, but let's be honest, most of us probably couldn't explain the difference beyond the basic definitions.
You're absolutely right. It's one of those things you learn in school, maybe even use intuitively, but don't always fully grasp the nuances of. And those nuances can make a big difference, especially when you want to communicate with precision and style.
Exactly. So we've got a bunch of really insightful sources here, and our mission is to take you from grammar novice to, well, maybe not Shakespeare, but definitely someone who can wield active and passive voice like a pro.
Exactly. By the end of this deep dive, you'll be choosing between them strategically, shaping your message with more control and impact.
Okay, so let's build from the ground up. When we say active voice, what does that really mean in a practical sense?
Well, think of it this way. Active voice is all about clarity and directness. The subject, the one doing the action, is front and center, followed by the verb, the action itself, and then the object, the thing receiving the action. It's like a straight line, subject, verb, object. The chef prepared the meal, for instance. Chef is the subject, prepared is the verb, and meal is the object. No mystery, no confusion. Boom, done.
Crystal clear. So in passive voice, how does that structure get flipped around?
Passive voice kind of shifts the spotlight. The focus moves to the action itself or to the thing receiving the action. The doer might still be there tucked away at the end with a little by phrase, or it might be gone altogether. So our chef example becomes, the meal was prepared by the chef. Now, the meal's in the limelight. Was prepared, that's our verb phrase. And notice that was is what we call an auxiliary verb. It helps form the passive voice. And sometimes we might even say, the meal was prepared, leaving out the chef entirely if it's not important who did it.
Okay, so it's all about emphasis. Active voice is like, look at what this person did, and passive voice is like, look at what happened, and maybe who did it.
You've got it. And our sources really highlight this difference. Active voice, that direct subject-verb-object structure, tends to be more engaging and punchy. Think about a news headline or a story you're telling a friend. Active voice just has that energy.
Right, like saying, the cat chased the mouse is way more exciting than the mouse was chased by the cat.
Yeah.
And our sources do say that passive voice tends to sound more formal, maybe a bit distant.
Yeah, it's true. Think about academic journals or scientific reports. They often use passive voice because the focus is on the research findings, the methods, the results, not so much on who did what. It can also sound more objective, like it's just stating facts, not opinions. The experiment was conducted under controlled conditions, for instance.
So different tools for different jobs. Active voice for when you want to be direct and lively, and passive voice for when you want to be a little more formal or shift the focus away from the doer. But tenses, Now that's where grammar can get tricky. How does all this active and passive stuff work across all the different tenses?
Don't worry, it's not as chaotic as it might seem at first. It all comes down to how we modify the main verb, and you're right, tenses are key here. Those auxiliary verbs we mentioned play a big role. So let's start with present simple. Active, he writes poems. Passive, poems are written by him. See how that R sneaks in before written?
Yeah, that's the helping verb showing up.
Exactly. Now, present continuous. Active, he is writing a poem. Passive, a poem is being written by him. Here, we've got is being to indicate that ongoing action in the passive. And for present perfect, active. He has written a poem. Passive. A poem has been written by him. Has been indicates a finished action that's still relevant in the present.
Okay, so it seems like adding different forms of to be is the secret sauce for making those passive forms. What about the past tenses?
Same idea applies, really. Past simple active. They built the house. Passive. The house was built by them. We use was as the auxiliary. Past continuous active, they were building a house. Passive, the house was being built by them. Here, were being shows that continuous action in the past, and for the past, perfect active. They had built a house. Passive, the house had been built by them, had been, indicates that the action was completed before another past action or time.
All right, so there's a pattern emerging. We just need to remember the right form of to be to match the tense. Now, what about those future tenses?
Future tenses follow the same principle. Future simple active, she will finish the report. Passive, the report will be finished by her. And for future perfect active, she will have finished the report. Passive, the report will have been finished by her. See? That be in all its forms is, are, was, were, been, being. It's the key to unlocking the passive voice in pretty much any tense.
That breakdown is super helpful. It makes the whole tense thing a lot less daunting. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. When should we be using active voice, and when does passive voice become the better choice?
This is where it gets really interesting. Like our sources point out, active voice is your go-to for most situations. When you want to be clear, concise, and engaging, active voice is usually the way to go. It's direct, it shows who's doing what, and it creates a stronger connection with the audience. Think about it like this. If you want to make an impact, active voice is like speaking directly to someone, looking them in the eye.
It's like saying, I did this instead of this was done. There's more ownership, more accountability.
Exactly. But there are definitely times when passive voice can be a more strategic choice. Our sources highlight a few key scenarios. One is when the doer of the action is unknown, or maybe you don't want to specifically mention who did it. Think of those classic phrases, mistakes were made, or a decision has been reached.
It's a way of being a bit vague, maybe even avoiding responsibility in some cases.
Right. Sometimes you want to emphasize the action or the result more than the person or thing that caused it. Like in a scientific study, the data were analyzed, puts the focus on the data and the analysis, not on the specific researchers who did it.
So it's like choosing the right tool for the job. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Precisely. And there's even more to this passive voice toolkit. What happens when we add in those modal verbs? Can, should, must, all those words that add shades of possibility or obligation.
Yeah, modal verbs always a bit tricky. How do they fit into the passive voice structure?
They actually slide in pretty seamlessly. The modal verbs stays put, and we just add in be right after it, followed by the past participle. So you can solve the problem becomes the problem can be solved, or they should address this issue turns into this issue should be addressed. The focus shifts to the possibility or necessity of the action being done to the object.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like saying it's possible for someone to solve the problem, or it's necessary for someone to address this issue. What about infinitives? Those to plus verb forms like to finish, to eat, to go.
Infinitives in the passive voice have a little transformation too. It becomes to be plus the past participle of the main verb. For example, I expect them to finish the project becomes I expect the project to be finished. Or they want someone to fix the car can become they want the car to be fixed. The emphasis shifts from who doing the action to the action being done to the object.
Got it. And gerunds, those ing verbs that act like nouns, like running is good exercise or I enjoy reading. Those always confuse me a bit.
Gerunds are interesting. When they need to be passive, they take the form of being plus the past participle. So I dislike people criticizing me transforms into I dislike being criticized. And she enjoys people complimenting her work becomes she enjoys being complimented for her work. It's actually more common than you might think.
Oh yeah, being complimented. Totally hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Our sources also mention some special cases where passive voice gets a little bit more complex. One is when you have verbs with two objects, like give, send, show, those kinds of verbs.
Right, those verbs that have both a direct object, the thing being acted upon, and an indirect object, the recipient of the action. In the active voice, it's pretty straightforward. They gave her a present. Present is the direct object, her is the indirect. But in the passive voice, things get interesting because either object can become the subject of the sentence.
So you can say a present was given to her, or she was given a present. Both are correct.
Exactly. The first one emphasizes the present, the second emphasizes the person who received it. It gives you more flexibility in how you frame the information and what you want to highlight.
Okay, that's cool. What about those causative structures? Those sentences where you're talking about getting someone else to do something for you.
Those involve causative verbs like have and get, and they often show up in passive constructions. Take the active sentence. She had the mechanic repair her car. In the passive, we often focus on the thing being acted upon, so it becomes, she had her car repaired by the mechanic. Or even just, she had her car repaired if who did it isn't that important. The emphasis is on what happened to the car.
So it's like shifting the focus to the action itself and downplaying who actually did it. And finally, those reporting verbs like say, believe, think. We see these all the time in the news and in everyday conversations.
Right. Let's say you have an active sentence like, people believe that she is a talented artist. You can make that passive in a couple of ways. One is to use an impersonal it construction. It is believed that she is a talented artist. This kind of creates a sense of general opinion without attributing it to any specific people.
Like everyone's saying it, but no one in particular.
Yeah, exactly. The other way is to make the subject of the reported clause the subject of the passive sentence. She is believed to be a talented artist. This puts more focus on the person and the beliefs surrounding them. Both structures are grammatically correct, they just create slightly different effects.
That's really helpful. Now, before we wrap up, are there any common mistakes that people make when using active and passive voice that we should warn our listeners about?
Oh, for sure. Our sources point out a few big ones. One is using the wrong verb form in the passive voice, like the letter was sent instead of the letter was sent. That past participle is crucial.
Yeah, gotta watch those irregular verbs.
Another common mistake is messing up the word order, like saying the meeting held was yesterday instead of the meeting was held yesterday. And maybe the biggest mistake of all is overusing the passive voice. It can make your writing sound really clunky and indirect. Remember that active voice example we talked about earlier? My mother baked the cake and my friends attended the party. That's way punchier and more engaging than the passive version.
Right. Active voice is your friend, unless you have a good reason to go passive. So, big picture, what are the key things you want our listeners to remember about active and passive voice?
The big takeaways are that active voice emphasizes the doer of the action, and it usually makes your communication clearer and more engaging. Passive voice, on the other hand, emphasizes the action or the receiver, and it's a good choice when the doer is unknown, irrelevant, or when you want to create a sense of objectivity. And of course, knowing how to use those different passive constructions, especially with modals, infinitives, gerunds, and those special cases we talked about, will give you a lot more control and nuance in your writing and speaking. Finally, just being aware of those common errors can help you avoid some embarrassing grammar slip-ups.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding how these choices affect the way your message comes across. It's about being a more skillful and intentional communicator.
And on that note, here's something to think about as you go about your day. Pay attention to how active and passive voice are being used in different situations, whether it's a news article, an email, or even just a casual conversation. Ask yourself, why did the speaker or writer choose this particular voice? Maybe even try mentally rephrasing some of those sentences in the other voice. What changes? How does the emphasis shift? That kind of active engagement with language is the best way to really internalize these concepts and level up your communication game.
Great advice. I know I'm going to be listening more carefully now. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of active and passive voice. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.
Bye for now.